Today, we are diving into a really cool financial paper. It uncovers a hidden market signal for one of the biggest, most invisible threats companies face right now. And it turns out the market might just know who's vulnerable long before an attack ever happens.
So, this all starts with a paradox, something that seems to defy all common sense. What if I told you that, on average, investing in companies with higher cybersecurity risk has actually been, well, more profitable? It sounds completely backward, I know, but the data is really compelling.
And this is the number at the very heart of the mystery. 8.3%. That's right. A group of researchers found that if you took a portfolio of companies that were identified as having the highest exposure to cyber threats, they actually outperformed the companies with the lowest risk by a whopping 8.3% a year. So that brings up a huge question. Why in the world are investors apparently rewarding companies for being more vulnerable?
Okay, let's get into it. To even start to answer that question, we have to understand how these researchers could possibly measure something as complex and, as hidden as cyber risk across the entire market.
The big breakthrough here wasn't about hacking systems, it was about analyzing language. They came up with this really novel method using textual analysis. They focused specifically on Item 1A risk factors in the annual 10K filings. That super comprehensive report public companies have to file with regulators every single year. And the method was just brilliantly simple. First, they pinpointed a bunch of companies that had suffered a confirmed data breach. That became their training sample. Second, they used AI to analyze the language these companies used in their risk reports before they got attacked. And then third, they used that linguistic fingerprint to score every other company out there. Think of it like a plagiarism checker for danger. The more a company's disclosures sounded like one from a firm that was about to get hacked, the higher its risk score. So, here's the crucial point. This score isn't just measuring how much a company talks about cyber risk. No, it's actually capturing a company's systematic exposure to these threats. What that means is, it's not about just one-off problems. It's about how vulnerable they are to the whole landscape of risks that lead to real breaches.
And this slide just illustrates the difference perfectly. Take a look at what the high-risk firm says. You get a sense of, fallibility. They're admitting that the threat is always changing and that a perfect defense is difficult or impossible. Now compare that to the low-risk firm. They're expressing confidence, saying their security measures are adequate. The language itself reveals their whole posture towards the risk.
So, okay, the method is really clever, but a score is only useful if it actually predicts something in the real world. So the big question is, does it work? This was the key test, right? The researchers had to prove that their textual analysis wasn't just some clever academic exercise. They had to show it was a genuine leading indicator of future trouble.
And the answer came back with this, just a staggering number. So what does 92.7% mean? Well, for every one standard deviation jump in a company's risk score, their probability of getting hit with a real cyber attack in the future went up by over 90%. So yeah, a higher score directly correlated with a much, much higher chance of actually getting hacked down the line.
Now, what's really cool is that the score also lines up with our real-world intuition. I mean, look at this. The industries that depend most heavily on IT, business equipment, finance, they showed the highest average risk scores. And the more traditional sectors like manufacturing, they were the lowest. The score was actually picking up on industry-wide vulnerabilities. Okay, so we've established the score is legit. It really does identify firms that are more likely to be attacked. So this brings us right back to our central mystery. Why on earth would investors be paying an 8.3% premium to hold these riskier stocks? The answer lies in one of the most fundamental ideas in all of finance, the risk premium. You see, investors aren't cheering for risk. They are demanding to be paid for taking it on. That extra return isn't a prize for being risky, it's compensation for being willing to bear the potential for a really big loss.
And here's the other side of that coin. What the researchers found was that while these high-risk stocks do great on average, they perform absolutely terribly when a major cyber event hits the news and fear spikes across the whole market.
This is the trade-off, right here. On a normal day, yeah, holding these stocks earns you a nice positive return. But on days when searches for stuff like data breach or hacker spike, these are the stocks that get hammered. So that 8.3% premium, it's not a free lunch. It's basically hazard pay for the very real danger that your investment is going to take a nosedive when the next big cyber attack makes headlines.
So this entire theory, the idea that the market was pricing in this hidden risk all along, was about to get put to the ultimate test, with one of the most sophisticated cyber attacks in history.
Back in December of 2020, news of the SolarWinds hack sent absolute shockwaves through the corporate world, not to mention the government. It was a supply chain attack, which meant a breach at just one company cascaded down to affect thousands of its clients, including major U.S. federal agencies. It was a huge deal. And for the researchers, this was the perfect real-world test. Remember, their risk scores were based on corporate filings from 2018 or even earlier. So the question was, could a score based on that old data actually predict which companies would get hit hardest by this very real, very current crisis? The results were stunningly clear. In the 3-day window right around the disclosure, the companies that the model had flagged with a high cyber risk score years before, they lost, on average, about 0.9% of their value. But get this, the companies with low risk scores, their stocks actually went up by 0.6%. The market immediately punished the firms whose own language had hinted they were vulnerable. The theory held up perfectly under fire.
So the crucial takeaway here is this. This research provides powerful evidence that financial markets are incredibly efficient. They can detect and price even really complex, non-financial risks like cybersecurity, and they often do it using signals that are buried deep in the language of corporate reports.
And that leaves us with a final, really fascinating thought. If the language in these old risk reports could predict the financial fallout from the SolarWinds hack, what other huge risks, from climate change exposure to supply chain problems, are being telegraphed in corporate filings right now, just waiting for the next crisis to bring them out into the light?